Okay, we got the, this is the texture, pressing into clay demonstration, basically. So I've got a whole variety of textures here I'm going to show you. And basically the first thing is just how to press this in. This is a leaf I just grabbed from outside. Natural materials work great on this assignment. I've had students bring in broccoli before and all kinds of stuff like that. It works great. So first thing is obviously the vein of the leaf is more textured on this side. So I'm going to use that facing the clay, and I'll just place it where I want it rather than pressing with my fingers, which can leave impressions from my fingers. If you use one of my small rolling pins here, it can roll the texture right into the clay nice and even. And if you didn't have access to something like this, you could maybe put down a paper first and slide your hand over it, or anything to just dissipate the pressure from your fingers. So we take this and we kind of hold it in position and just roll it until the leaf is sort of stuck in the clay or sitting flush with it. Once that happens, carefully pull it right out of there. If any debris got stuck, it'll burn off in the kiln, so no big deal. And just so you can see, it leaves a nice impression right there. So that's a leaf. And of course, if you rolled a texture that you did not like, you can go back to that blue rib tool and you just pull it and it will erase. Softer textures are erased pretty easily. So then other things, pressing texture in is one way to do it. Another way is basically stamping. So if you take, this is a stamp tool, and I just do this, it's going to create triangles everywhere. There's another sort of like texture stamp on this. I can put that, and it's triangles with these lines on them. And I could do it as just one mark, or I could do it as a bunch and build up a surface texture that way. Same thing with like a brush like this. You can see as I'm doing this, it's creating a really interesting texture. A toothbrush will do the same thing, a little bit different, a little bit softer. Obviously, it's a smaller tool, so you can be a little more precise with that. That's just kind of dabbing it on. If I pull it, that'll do something totally different. So you can get an idea of what that stuff does. And then something like this is also basically working like a stamp. I can roll it, and it's going to create that golf ball surface texture all over, which kind of reminds me a little bit of like snake skin. So I could do that. You could always take the golf ball too and just pop it in the clay a little bit like that, and you'll have just a little crater of a mark. So you can kind of see what that looks like. And again, I can go ahead and erase all that with my blue rib tool. It's a little bit more work if you've really established the texture like I did with that bigger brush to erase, or a big hole like that. It's not something that necessarily can be fixed that easy. What else? I have these texture rollers in my classroom, which are really cool. If you wanted to leave an interesting border around something, you can see what that's doing. I can just go ahead and put it everywhere. It just creates an overall, very interesting texture. There's also these texture plates I have in my classroom, which if you're looking for just a background texture, you lay that down. It's a little bit, for these bigger ones, if you have a rolling pin, if it covers the entire thing, and you just lightly apply pressure, that will be embedded in the surface. And I already have that other texture on there, but you can kind of get an idea of what that texture plate will do. And I have a pretty good variety of all of those texture plates. So there's something. And if I erase this, I'll show you a few more things which are important to know when it comes to pressing texture into clay. If I've got a shell, like something like this you would think would leave a really cool impression, when I press it, it really only leaves a very tiny area. So something like this is going to require a little bit of practice to get the feel for. And it kind of requires starting on one end and rolling. And you kind of have to figure it out how it's going to look best. But you can kind of see that that's a little bit better, but it still doesn't sell the illusion of that shell. So it would take me a little bit of practice with this texture to figure out the best way to do that. And to practice is pretty easy. Just grab some clay from the recycle bucket, pound it flat, and just practice pressing the texture in to see what you like. Pretty easy way to figure that out. Certain things like bark could work pretty good. It all depends on the bark you get and how aggressive you want it to look. Like that bark is going to leave some edges, certainly, but this area right here is not as noticeable. So sometimes it just depends. I had a student that liked mountain biking, brought in the bike tire tread and worked that into the clay pretty nicely, and they did a pretty good job with it. So you can kind of see what that'll do. Something that's a little bit thicker like this, that has to be worked into the clay a little slower until you kind of embed the whole thing in the surface. And then use your needle tool. You can kind of grab the stem and pull it right out of there. And you can see that leaves a pretty nice texture. Here's a string here. When I do something that's thicker like this, I like to really embed it into the clay. It's going to really show that texture much more easily noticed. You can see that's a pretty bold mark right there. And just a couple more things here. Let me erase this part right here. I've got this plastic lizard. Now I could put it like this, and you'll get just the belly and the feet. Or I can go like this, and again, I probably will have to embed this more deeper into the clay to really show up. And in fact, something like this might not work great because I just can't embed it enough to get all of the limbs in. So it looks, pretty interesting for the body shape, but I just couldn't get this part in. So that's another one I might have to practice with just a little bit to get the feel for. And something like Legos, obviously, are going to work really good depending on what you're trying to do. Let's see what the Lego does. And I've got these little devices which will roll lines into the clay. And there's all kinds of different versions of these that I have as well. Somebody brought in pasta once, and something that interesting that we learned about pasta, obviously it creates a nice texture in the clay. They had embedded this pasta into their clay in a way that they couldn't get it all out. So we left it in, and over the course of constructing their assignment, the pasta softened from the moisture of the clay, and then mold grew. So sometimes just unanticipated things can happen that are hard to be aware of. It's just one of those things that can happen along the way. And that is pretty much a variety of textures and how to press them into clay. Good luck.